So welcome to PartnerUp Partnerships Podcast. All right, we're live.
I'm excited to jump in. Get to work.
The thing that matters in a partnership is the trust and sacrifice.
Proposing, building software that works for you.
The end, because we are. Did I lose you immediately? No, we're here. All right, there we go. So welcome everybody to PartnerUp. For those looking on YouTube, I am in a strange location. I did do the job though of bringing my camera, so at least I'm somewhat in fidelity. I'm trying to get the lighting figured out. So it's a hotel room. I'm here in Boston, working with the Drift team after some big news that I'm sure everyone's saw if you follow the Drift story, with a strategic investment from Vista that's kind of the first of its kind. So exciting to be traveling a little bit for some strategic stuff. And today's episode, I am stoked to have on Avanish Sahai. Avanish, welcome to PartnerUp.
Jared, delighted to be here. Thanks for the invite, and congratulations to you and the Drift team on the great news as well. And really looking forward to this. I think it'll be fun to have a good dialogue about a lot that's going on in the world of partnering and ecosystems.
Definitely, there's I think it represents just the speed and the acceleration of change happening. If you look at, I think actually this might be an interesting place to kick off. If you look at what happened with Marketo and Vista, right? So Marketo was fledgling a little bit in the public markets, right? Vista brought them under their wing. And, what was one of their key levers during that period was ecosystem as a strategy, right? They really figured out their channel and solutions partner program. They solidified that alliance with Adobe to where Vista got one of the best returns I've seen in a while, right? Turned a little bit more than $1 billion into $4 billion in less than 3 years. The ecosystem was a big part of that strategy. And I think we've seen Vista, come to Drift to go, hey, this isn't just a strategy for, traditional, but people think of private equity. It's actually can be a strategic lever to bring companies into, the next phase of their maturity, public markets, et cetera. So I think, Vista recognized, hey, there was already ecosystem with Drift and Marketo, right? That partnership. We were Adobe's partner of the year. How do we double down here and take that to the next level and bring Drift into the public markets? So, venture capital and private equity and, growth investing, SoftBank, right? Like all of these things are sort of colliding on what the future is going to look like. I'm sure you're seeing some similar things in the market where you might agree or disagree with that take.
No, Jared, I think broadly I completely agree with you, right? I think the growth that the tech sector is seeing, right? The lines are blurring between what's a seed round, an A round, a B round, a growth round. And frankly, with the kind of valuations that are out there and the opportunities that are out there, right? What I would consider typical PE or buyout firms like a Vista or Thoma Bravo and others, I think they see an opportunity to really make strategic investments, help them grow, right? It's not a fix it. It's a take something that's amazing and innovative and grow it. And to your point about ecosystems, right? I think there is a recognition, right, at a board level, at an investor level, a C-suite level, that the ecosystem or the partners and the channels used to be a bit of more of a distribution model or a augmentation of my professional services organization or some integrations. I think the last few years, you and I have been part of some organizations that have really made this a core piece of growth, right? How do you really scale faster? How do you kind of make this work like a flywheel? So I think folks like this and others are seeing that as well and finding opportunities to invest in organizations and companies that have that as part of their DNA.
I couldn't agree more. There was a foundation here that I think needed to be in place. And it's cool to see it kind of from the front lines because I think a lot of venture firms that were, more traditionally early stage, that they're not participating in the public markets where ecosystem is a core part of the strategy, right? Like most venture-backed B2B startups, there aren't chief partnerships officers and, true VPs of partnerships that have done that story 2, 3, 4 times like there are in public, publicly traded companies where there are the CMO, the chief technology officer, the C-suite that's like, oh yes, they've been in this story multiple occasions. You just don't see that in early stage companies. So it's cool to see that shift happen. And I think it's bullish for why, this podcast is, important. Companies like Crossbeam, communities like the Cloud Software Association. I get that plug in every time. If you're not a member, see how I work that in. Go to cloudsoftwareassociation.com and join the Slack group. Great supportive group of people for helping you figure out how to get buy-in, figure out some of the things that we talk about on this show, and also annual conferences coming up at the end of the fall. So check that out. But with that, Avanish, let's hop into the first topic you and I were aligning on, which is maybe helping the audience understand, the perspective that you have on defining what ecosystem means and how that might be a little bit different today than what you saw the emergence of, let's say, in your SalesForce career. So for the audience, Avanish has had formative, I'll call them formative positions, leadership positions at SalesForce, at ServiceNow, and now at Google Cloud, kind of leading that ecosystem charge, so to speak. So I think the perspective that he can share on this is really illustrative on what it might mean for the future versus what it meant whenever, the ecosystem that a lot of us play in Salesforce, right? What it meant back then. So maybe let's start with that ecosystem topic, how you would define ecosystem.
Yeah, so I think, again, if you look it up in the dictionary, you'll probably find some very specific definitions. But I think of it from a practitioner's perspective, like you and I are, Jared, in a very kind of almost a visual manner, right? In the old world, right, call it the era of client server and so on, there were a lot of partner programs. There was no lack of partner programs. But the classes of partners all operated in silos, right? You had some service partners. You may have had some managed service providers. You might have had some technology integrations. But each of those might have been managed by a different partner manager or a different set of partner managers. But they didn't really operate in a true integrated fashion, right? And I think what we've seen over the last 10 years, right, and certainly, some of us, I think, kicked this off at Salesforce, the late 2009, 2010 timeframe, was how do you think about this in a different way, right? An ecosystem should really have a multiplier effect, right? And I think of it visually as there's a stovepipe model, which is what it was before, all these separate stovepipes, but now it's a flywheel, right? Which is, hey, an SI could also be building product on a platform, and they're selling the product as a subscription, right? Or again, an MSP is bringing different products together, stitching them together in a common offering, and bringing that to the market, right? And helping both maybe a platform provider, different technology providers, can it really create a much more valuable solution that the customer then says, look, that thing solves my problem in a much more comprehensive manner. At least for me, that is the visual, I think, from stovepipes to more of a flywheel. And how do these different categories of partnerships and partner models work much more in tandem and much more collaboratively, rather than, each of these being kind of what I would normally have said, hey, just a pure augmentation of a services team or maybe of a sales team through resell and so on. How do you kind of really bring that, again, strategically, right? So it has a lot of strategy implications. How do you bring that in alignment with your traditional sales and distribution models? And frankly, how do you support that on an ongoing basis from product roadmap, from frankly a support itself perspective? So those things have to change for you to operate a real ecosystem, at least in my view. Do you agree with that? How do you feel about that?
Well, what's funny is I was going to maybe ask for an example, but what's hilarious is I have an example of exactly what you just said right now that seems weird given our stage. Like you said, an SII can also be building product. So you would think of a large SI as having the capabilities of doing some product development. But let me give you a weird real life example at Drift. There's a company called MarketLink. They've been doing chat services like a BPO. They do outsourced, chat, because that was a fairly common thing for a lot of companies. And they've been doing it for well over a decade. Chat's been around for a long time. Drift kind of disrupted their business model in a lot of ways because their top clients were B2B. So there's bots and automation and AI.
Yep.
And they leaned in to developing services around Drift, and they actually became really good implementation partners. So then they moved up the stack, right, into kind of like the services world from the outsourced, arbitrage on hours, which very low margin, services a little bit better. And then you know what they've done? They've launched a product called Lift.ai. And now this isn't a multi-thousand person AI company. This is a couple hundred employees. And Lift.ai they have landed some of our best customers. And I can mention some of them because there's case studies on our websites, like Okta, public SSO company.
Yep.
Point Click Care. I did a webinar with Point Click Care, a decent sized company. Lift.ai, which wouldn't be a startup by the San Francisco Silicon Valley terms, and Drift, and how Lift AI helps them prioritize bot targeting for anonymous website visitors. Like, they built a solution around Drift that is a SaaS product that's driving value from our customers and is doing services. I couldn't have imagined that 3 years ago. And it's like, it's happening so quick, even down market, right? In the startup world, services businesses are innovating just like you said. So I would say, if I had an opinion, I'll let the market tell me. And the market's telling me, yeah, Avanish is right. Like, you've seen it with your own eyes. And we have. I think the question that I would have for you as a follow-up is, okay, so that blended, I kind of have two different teams. I have a channel team and I have an ISV team. What would be the recommendation? Like, obviously not every partner is colliding like that. Should we be thinking about that partner manager kind of role, so to speak, that's, they're not responsible for the customer journey. They're not responsible for like the customer success or the sale, but like the partner themselves. Should this be combining into one function? Is that what you mean by partners versus stovepipe, or just more integrated across the business?
Yeah, I think it's a really important question, right? And I think it's part of an evolution. So I don't think there's a perfect answer quite yet. But those of us who are living it are basically thinking, hey, first of all, from a partnership perspective, right? You think about these partners in a much more holistic fashion. So when you put together a business plan, you think about what is a 3-year, 5-year business plan. It's no longer just services or just managed service or just product, right? You think about it in a much more holistic fashion, number one, right? So that is, I think, at the baseline is how you think about the business itself, and how do you help the partner think about their business is changing. Two, from a organizational perspective, frankly, I think the metrics is where you start with, and the success metrics have to start changing, right? It's no longer just, remember in the traditional SI world, it was about influence. Well, now you're going to have influence. You're going to maybe have ACV because they're selling product. You may have rev share because they may be distributing a core part of your offering and platform. So how do you measure first of all, drive the right incentive, and then two, measure the success of the relationship and of therefore the team start to change as well, right? So it's no longer, again, the stovepipe of, hey, each of those teams had very well defined, a single threaded metrics. It started to change. So you have to think about it in a much more holistic fashion. And then I do think that the organization and the skills that you want in that team have to start changing, right? So you want someone who can think across these lines and think more, find an opportunity, just like the example you just gave, and say, hey, talking to a CEO of a CXO of one of the existing partners, saying, have you thought about X? Have you thought about building a product because it seems like you have something repeatable there? Or have you thought about a managed service model? So really taking a much more strategic alignment. And I think that will require some changes to both how things are organized, how success is measured, and frankly, how you think about scaling both the business and the organization along those lines.
That's such an interesting way to approach it. Like, if your remit as a partnerships leader in any organization had the approach of what you just said, so to speak, your job is, in the old world, is you need to manage our channel program, and like, here it is, or you need to manage our ISVs or our platform and developer community or alliances with that one, account, Microsoft, Google, SalesForce. But your remit was something maybe different, along the lines of, how do you create an ecosystem that is across these, barriers? And I think that example of, having service providers that are building on your platform and driving value, and they're becoming stickier to your ecosystem because then they're dependent on, let's say, some, ACV, ARR, recurring revenue from product, and they're servicing, like, shout out to Don Simpson and Lyft AI team. I guess that's how he's going to work his way onto this podcast, by the way. So whenever you see him next, Don's definitely going to be on here because we need to talk about this more. It's really hard to surface the value of that, but they've kind of embedded themselves everywhere at Drift. And I don't know that a partner leader today would be thinking, oh yeah, like we should get these service providers to build, product. You just wouldn't have never thought that. And now that you say it so simply, it's like, well, what a competitive advantage. What a competitive advantage over everyone else, because what's the value to, there's 8,000 MarTech companies, thousands of sales tech companies, data infrastructure. That's this whole other category. We're all over inundated with too much information, too many choices, too many options. And I think in the BD world, we're competing every bit as much for attention as we are for differentiation. And to get that attention, you better have way more value than the person next door.
Yeah, and again, I think you're absolutely nailing it, Jared, on that, right? So think about the customer. If we are overwhelmed, think about then the customers, right? And how overwhelmed they are with all these different folks approaching them from, different marketing campaigns, email campaigns, social, etc. And they're saying, where do I find the folks who can actually help me build my business, right? I don't want just a transactional relationship. I don't want just a pure technology vendor. I want someone who understands my business, brings something to the table that actually is relatively complete. Yes, of course, we'll configure it and we'll tweak it and so on. But I think that is the fundamental change I always think about, starting with the customer. And I think it's the customers are driving that, which is they don't want, hundreds of relationships. They want fewer, more strategic, tighter. And these organizations we just talked about will play that role, or frankly, being a bit more of that aggregator, rather than letting the customer do all the aggregation and figuring things out and how to connect all these different capabilities. Work with the fewer ones of them, but really who understand your business and are not just an implementer or just a vendor or just an ISV. So I think that is a fundamental change that I think we're all in the midst of.
When I talked to David Cancel originally, he's the CEO of Drift, and one of the reasons I was like, there is something to learn for him, kind of under his tutelage, so to speak, was, I asked him why start Drift, why have this category, what is so meaningful about this, and he told me, he said, he focuses on undeniable shifts in behavior, consumer behavior, and so messaging 5-6 years ago was an undeniable shift. Right. It hadn't made its way really into customer experience on the B2B side. So he was ahead of that curve, but it was based on an undeniable shift. I think what you just said is another undeniable shift in a different way, in that there is a mass consolidation happening. I mean, the news just broke today about, MailChimp's acquisition, Intuit picking up MailChimp. And it's like, whoa, that was a nice $12 billion acquisition of a brand that I think if we've been in startups for a long time, we've all known forever and loves. Yeah. First small business I started was actually first nonprofit. Before I even started a business, I started a nonprofit, and I used them in 2005, 2004. That's how long they've been around, but everything's consolidating. I wouldn't have thought of Intuit as getting into the email marketing space, right?
Yeah. No, and again, you think about it, why, if you think about the rationale that they proposed for that acquisition was, hey, we are a trusted provider of the back office to the vast majority of SMBs and a large number of corporate or mid-market clients, right? Everybody uses QuickBooks. Everybody is kind of relying on that. And their basic argument is, hey, if we're the trusted advisor, a trusted vendor on the finance side, what are other things that those same customers need that we can bring to the table, right? And it actually makes logical sense, because guess what? The marketing function in that SMB,
it's not there.
It's probably
on Main Street. It's not, right. Like I remember my journey. My journey was, I think this is where domain registrars in a large part have really screwed up, like GoDaddy versus like an Intuit, because, my journey started with, domain, and then, I'm selling my own clients, this is 2005 through 8, selling my own clients. And then, it's like, oh, got to get my book set up. So then it's QuickBooks, Intuit. And then a little bit after that, it was like, hey, I wanted to start doing some like email marketing. And then it was MailChimp. So I think they're a gatekeeper to a lot of those relationships for Main Street, where back office kind of gets set up first because your sales are manual. You're not building brand and email and audience first.
Exactly.
So that consolidation makes sense the same way that consolidating kind of these functions into, more, what do we call these roles typically? Channel account manager, alliances manager. To me, this is all about having a true consulting function where your job is like, hey, your ecosystem partners, wherever they are, your job is to make them more dependent on the ecosystem by virtue of these new way of looking at the metrics, right? And driving value to their organization and helping them grow versus you hitting a number. It's like an inverse look on the same challenge and same opportunity, because there's consolidation happening everywhere. And if we can get our ecosystem partners to kind of consolidate around our experience and them going cross solution and technology and, let's say, strategy, there's a number of ways to monetize an ecosystem beyond just the traditional ways of thinking about it. That macro trend of consolidation, right? Consumers just, there's too many choices. Like, makes it way easy. QuickBooks, okay, MailChimp, right? It just works. It seems to be true.
Yeah, and I think there's one other factor right on top of that, right? Which is the world has moved, or is very quickly moving, to a world of subscriptions, right? And therefore, the notion of customer success, no matter the size, right, is how do you make sure you retain that customer relationship? How do you make sure you bring, to your point, bring continuous and incremental value, right? So if you have the relationship, the ability to, again, if you're doing a good job, to bring in more offerings, more services, more capabilities, it's a natural way to kind of grow the relationship, right? Some companies will do that through building new products. Others may do it through acquisitions. Others may do it through the ecosystem, right? And that's the combination of modes, right? Build, buy, partner. And I think that is a fundamental change that's also going on. Is yes, the consolidation is again a result of that, building that relationship, growing the relationship, driving more value, right, to the customer. And as long as you're a trusted advisor, trusted relationship, trusted vendor, then you have earned the right to bring more into that conversation.
The question that then poses is, I feel like in talking to a lot of folks involved in business development and partnerships, there's lots of firefighting and being mired in the weeds, so to speak. And I think this question, for example, like, there is a mass consolidation that's happening because consumer expectations have shifted to, like, make it so simple that I don't have to think about it, because otherwise I'm out of your funnel. Like, I'm no longer a customer. It's just undeniable.
The risk is high.
Like,
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
So how are you as a partner leader, or your organization, your board, et cetera, dealing with that shift? And if I think about it from that perspective, how am I dealing with that shift? I'm like, I actually need to think about this, right? This is something where this wasn't part of the plan, but then becomes an opportunity for us if we are able to get ahead of that curve. So I think that's really illustrative to go, okay, the stovepipe to flywheel model, I think we get that from a marketing perspective, but I think there's these other shifts that it will start to change, and we'll see it. We're already starting to see it in the market. Let's take it into the next phase around specifically like thinking about ecosystem as this blended thing based on some undeniable shifts. One of the things that I feel like is an outlier in some ecosystem strategies is when you're the small one and you have a relationship with the big one, right? So I've done some of that with like Drift to Adobe, but how do you, name of this podcast, right? How do you think about partnering up and not just becoming a cog in the machine, so to speak, around, a SalesForce ecosystem or Google Cloud, right? Another great and vastly quickly growing ecosystem. Having led those organizations, I'd love to hear your perspective on the lens that you look at that question of how to partner up.
Yeah, no, frankly, it's an ongoing, I think, quest to figure that out in a way that makes sense for all parties involved, right? Because again, you want to make sure it makes sense for the customer first and foremost, and make sure it makes sense for the partners, and you want to make sure, of course, it makes sense for you as the orchestrator, which is another term that's being used more and more, right? It's no longer just a platform, but again, you're the orchestrator of this ecosystem, right? And the way I think we think about it is the following, right? Is understanding what are those core capabilities or offerings that make sense to help bring together, right? So rather than saying, hey, come one, come all, everybody's got access to all the core capabilities, we want to find the ones that can truly help us move the needle and help the customer become more successful and bring more value to them. So we actually spend a lot of time think about what are those white spaces? Who are some of the leading companies that we think we can bring into our ecosystem and that we can help them, but frankly, they can help us by frankly, in the notion of partnering up, can they open new conversations, right, with buying centers or decision makers that we normally might not talk to? Do they bring something to the table that opens up a discussion with, someone in the front office that may not be typically, a traditional buyer of infrastructure, for example? Or are they doing something unique in the world of AI, right? And say, hey, can we leverage our AI infrastructure and capabilities with their domain knowledge? And that usually will come in the form of either vertical or horizontal, right? So kind of really think about this as solutions that fit into that framework and saying, hey, here's someone who understands, problem X in retail or in telco or in some other industry, and they're really disrupting, right? So now there is a value proposition to them, and there's a value proposition to us and our customers to say, look, we are aggregating this. We're doing a bit of the old world of curation and helping bring something to the table that truly is more unique and more distinctive, right? And back to the point of differentiation you're bringing up. So that requires a proactive approach to it, which is you scan the market, you keep tabs on who's doing what, keep tabs on, key investments, you keep tabs on, where the innovation is coming from. And frankly, Jared, the beauty of it is that innovation is now happening around the world. So you can no longer can say, hey, I can focus just on, Boston where you are and Austin and the Silicon Valley and Seattle, for example, right? Really have to open up that lens. And there's some amazing things happening in Latin America. There's things happening in, of course, in Southeast Asia and India and so on. So I think that is part of what a lot of us are playing the role of is really keeping very close eye on what's happening in the marketplace, what are things we can bring together, and then, frankly, again, use the term orchestration and bring together platform capabilities, bring together these offerings, maybe bring together one or two key SIs that understand that domain, and really drive that as a more complete solution to that particular problem. That, I think, at least in my mind, is how we've been approaching it, which is how do we help? Again, like you said, there's so many folks out there. How do we help the customers make the decision faster and bring something to the table that has the tight coupling, tight integration, and is really a lot more seamless to be deployed and configured and so on.
Okay, so I'm going to reverse engineer what you just told me and try to give away the secrets for how to break through into big partnerships then. So what I heard, I liked what you said at the beginning, horizontal and vertical and horizontal strategy. And I can't wait for the AI of the future where I can write in front of me and do a visual.
It's coming.
It'll happen.
It's coming.
So let's imagine a matrix in front of us, actually a spreadsheet, right? So X and Y axis, right? And understanding, okay, I'm going to partner up with, name the sumo of your space, right? And so what is their vertical strategy? So what verticals are they playing in? And then what's their horizontal strategy? Meaning let's say the buying centers, departments, centers within each vertical, and map out, okay, where they're the strongest, where they have to win, and where are you as the smaller partner, right? So like, where are you playing? And then you're understanding, okay, here's how we're potentially important to them. We kind of fit into their strategy. That might be like a good first exercise to understand, like, hey, they have a bunch of partners over here. And I know you've said that not all partners are created equal, right? Would that be a good way of kind of thinking through that initial approach? If you're the smaller one approaching the bigger one, is, hey, make sure you have that understanding. Don't just pitch, hey, we can provide the best service possible. We can provide, an innovative tech. You kind of got to think about it that way is maybe a good starting point.
I think it's a great kind of framework to start with, right? Which is, again, it's about empathy, right? It's help us help you. And I think having that framework of, hey, where are we headed, right? And if someone shows up and says, hey, I'm not going to call anyone out, but I only work in micro vertical X. And nowhere in our storytelling or in our messaging or positioning we've talked about micro vertical X. That's probably not going to land, right? So I think thinking about exactly like you described, where's the focus? What are things they're doing? What have they talked about? But more importantly, how can I help them, right? Because remember, our sales organizations across, myself, my peers, we're also being inundated with a lot of folks looking for attention. So try to understand where is that fit? How does it complement? And again, I always think about success metrics, right? Is do your homework in understanding what is it that drives success for my organization or my broader organization, right? So if I'm working with an infrastructure provider like Google Cloud or AWS or Azure, well, guess what? Their metrics are around consumption. And if I'm a smaller company, am I driving consumption? Am I a heavy data storage, compute, networking? You better have that answer, right? And say, yeah, look, this is the amount of consumption I drive. I typically, that because I drive a lot of data gravity, once we're deployed, here's the amount of volume of data that a typical customer is going to bring together because they're going to run these AI models on this respective cloud, for example. Now there is an angle. So I
You're
didn't think.
you're giving away all the secrets right now.
Well,
You're
I
giving
thought
all
that's what
away
you
all,
wanted me
all
to
the
do. I
secrets.
can, we can keep quiet.
Well, you're giving away all the secrets. So he's going to start charging you per listen to this one, because what's so interesting there is, imagine a conversation. So let's take that strategy at the top, which I think, let's say VP of BD to like VP of BD, like, hey, why we should partner. You're the bigger one. We're the smaller one. Aligning to those core metrics is, of course, it seems like a no-brainer. But then imagine, let's go down the stack to the front line, right? So where, hey, my, fledgling partner teams trying to work with the bigger teams, like much more experienced account teams. They're getting pinged by a lot of people trying to get access to their customers and their accounts. And if you're just coming in it without the with them, what's in it for me? Like me as a CSM or an account manager or whatever, like why do I need to prioritize your time, little partner, over the 500 other partners that are trying to take my time? If I don't understand that, I don't know that I can, so it's like, hey, let's say I'm a CSM, to use your consumption model, and I'm compensated on the net dollar retention of the aggregate of my accounts based on consumption. If I'm driving, and I know I'm driving X amount or Y amount of more consumption every time one of my accounts is connected, then I have a really easy story of like, look, here's how we help you make more money and your customers more successful. And in the 10 others that we've done with, Susan and John and your peers, here's what we've done for their accounts. Come prepared for that conversation. That's the trick. That's literally the secret of how I did it with Marketo. That is exactly how we did it, because it was consumption.
Yeah, I mean, and again, in some case, maybe consumption, right? In the case of someone like Salesforce, hey, I'm driving new users, right? There's net new users that are not in your current, right? So you have to really think that through. And yeah, you and I have known each other for a long time, but that I think that mindset is not always there, right? I think, and not to put anyone down, but often even at the CEO level of some of these smaller companies, they're so enamored with their technology. They're like, hey, we're the coolest thing, right? Thin sliced bread, or whatever other analogy you want. They might be, but if they're not going to align with those success metrics and understand how to drive those outcomes, they're going to get lost in the noise, right? And that is again back to the point of talent and organization. That mindset, the partner management function has to facilitate that. You have to, as a partner manager, as a leader, you have to instill that in the organization that says, here's, at the end of the day, this is not just about, Barney relationships. Nobody has time for that. So this has to be around impact, around value, and ultimately around economics. And the simple story is follow the money, right? How are we going to help people make money, drive consumption, drive growth, and that's where again back to the flywheel, right? That's where you have to think about it not just in a linear fashion, but frankly in a more complex fashion. And the people who are succeeding in these kind of roles now are the ones that can put that kind of framework and really communicate that in a very not as simple, but it has to be simple and credible way, right? It's not you can't BS your way out of it, right? You have to really think it through and understand how to drive that kind of value.
I could not agree more. I mean, this topic, that's how I got into, I would say, partnerships as a area of specialty, is this concept of like leveraging existing relationships in market with the category leader and becoming number one with that person, like their most important partner. That is something I became obsessed of because it seemed like the biggest growth hack in the world. And I come from being an entrepreneur myself. I've failed companies. I've learned a lot. And it's like, what is the best way for me to get ahead of the line of all of the competition and noise in the space? It's to get at the front of that line, to become their best partner. And I'll do my, towards the end of the podcast, plug for the Cloud Software Association. I call this, finding your sumo with a black swan event. Like, what is that activation moment that no one is aware of, where you go, hey, here's exactly how I've helped these customers with this use case and why it drives Y amount of value for you at the top line. It's strategic to your horizontal and vertical strategy and where you need to go. And here's how the front line is responding to it because it's helping them hit their metrics. And this is how we're going to be your number one partner. I'm giving a masterclass on this October 21st, 10 a.m. PT for the Cloud Software Association. See, I worked that right back in, same topic. So it's the first time I've done a masterclass for the Cloud Software Association, and would love everyone to join and check that one out. It's basically how to land your big alliance and expanding on some of the brilliant foundation that Avanish has laid out for us here on the topic of partnering up. So I had to squeeze that one in because that just happened. We partner with them, so I got to give them a plug.
They're a great
And
organization.
community's great.
I double down on your plug. I've worked with them before too, and it's I think you're spot on.
All right. I think if you did not fully grasp the strategy of horizontal to vertical, of how to make sure that you follow the money and tie what's in it for their business on the impact side down to the ICs, like how does this really help me hit my number? I think listen to that part again, because that's the trick right there. That's the trick to partnering up. And I think the last kind of we'll go from ecosystem into like the big alliances to maybe the boardroom, if we're kind of like going up in scale, is like framing that conversation around the why on, ecosystem. Like the point at which this becomes a strategic imperative for organizations, it seems like it's different based on size or, I often find, maybe Google is an interesting example because Google's ecosystem is vast, but it feels also different, right? Like Google's ad ecosystem was probably very different than the Google Cloud ecosystem. That's almost like you're like doing a different ecosystem. Maybe you're trying to convince, ad partners to, go in there and build ad products on Google Cloud and how it's going to be better. I think you might have you caught that team. You might have heard some of Avanish's insight into how he might be thinking about leveraging the ecosystem that already exists at Google. But the framing for that why and the conversation coming out of the boardroom for ecosystem becoming a strategic imperative, I'd love to kind of hear your take on how you kind of unpack that from like the top down, right? From the executive team or board level down to, ecosystem strategy and the rest of the business.
Yeah, so just by way of firsthand experience, so I'm on the board of HubSpot, and I've been on the board for 3 years.
I should have said that too, because
And yeah,
that's
and
what an incredible other ecosystem
right.
experience.
And one of the reasons that I was invited to join that board was exactly because it is a board level issue, right? Which is, I fundamentally believe that the most successful companies are platforms. And platforms are defined in many different ways. It does not always mean it's a platform as a service just for development on top of it, right? But a platform could be, hey, I'm exposing core data. I've got some really interesting aggregation of data around behavior, around conversation AI, and so on. And the more I can expose that, the more I can plug things around that. One, the stickier I get, which is good to me, good for me. Two, again, I'm driving more value to my customer, right? So I think the board imperative and the C-suite imperative around this is evolving as companies build their overall business strategy and associated product strategy. They're going from, often from single product to multi-product to then a platform. And once you have a platform, then you have to build an ecosystem around the platform. Because otherwise, if nobody's connecting to it, if nobody's building on it, guess what? You're not a platform. So that was a journey, by the way, I went through at SalesForce, right? It was sales and then added service and marketing and then force.com and the platform around it. Even ServiceNow went through the exact same, right? It was from IT to IT plus customer service management plus HR plus security. And now let's expose a platform and help other companies both build on the platform and around those application areas. That's what HubSpot's doing, and that's to a certain extent what we're doing at Google as well. And the notion then becomes that accelerator, right? So for that flywheel to kick in, right? It's a business strategy of greater customer traction, greater value, greater share of wallet, and that's why it becomes much more than can it just a program for partners, right? What is how can we really become more much more strategic, right? You talked earlier a lot, we talked about consolidation. Well, in that consolidation framework, right, the consolidator has to bring a lot of value. And that value is going to be because they've got the platform and the ecosystem around the platform. That becomes a board level discussion. Why? Because, hey, one, from a revenue perspective, are you going to make it work?
It's the
Two,
flywheel,
it's a
monetization,
flywheel.
distribution, stickiness.
Exactly.
Right.
And from a product perspective, you want to make sure that, again, this is I have to say, this is non-trivial, right? This is not an easy decision or investment, right? It requires, having a clear understanding of what you're investing in. How do you make sure the product and the product suites and the platforms are ready and equipped for that? Do you have an API strategy? Are you maintaining it? Are you documenting it? Right? Are things going to break the next time you do a new release? Right? So it's a pretty comprehensive set of discussions and decisions that have to be made. And that requires, I'll say, it's C-suite alignment, right? Because it involves product, it involves marketing, it involves sales, it involves support, it involves services, right? And that's part of the beauty of what I like about this kind of role, Jared, is increasingly you really have to be, again, to be successful, you have to be very cross-functional. You have to work across the organization to make sure that everybody understands why you're doing this, what the outcomes are going to be, but also what are the expectations and dependencies that you have from the other parts of your organization. And that's where the board and the C-suite have to both, one, get it, and two, sponsor it.
It's interesting because it feels like few companies are born out of that, founder discussion. Let's say, a couple founders, and then the early team is like, ecosystem is the strategy from the beginning. We've had some people on the show that have, like Jay McBain of Forrester, who I, love Jay's great writing. It's like, hey, you have to have the McDonald's first. You have to have something that's franchisable, so to speak, right? And that franchisable thing is something you need to be able to build on, so to speak, from the channel model. And I think from the platform model, you have to have enough value there to, replicate that. And what I think my thesis is, with the emergence of technologies like Crossbeam and, this partner kind of ecosystem category of software, which, that was never on anyone's mind. Like, hey, you can make this work better. that we'll start to see people try to be a little bit more disruptive with that as part of their core strategy out of the gate, especially when it's like, wow, like I love like Whoop out of Boston. Shout out Whoop. They have the amazing fitness tracking, etc. I love, Peloton. I love all these things. And then just look at Apple today, launches Fitness Plus, fully integrated, beautiful customer experience. And it's like, wow, okay, the competition is coming from everywhere. Accounting company, email marketing, it's all consolidating. And I think the lesson for all of us out there is like, and maybe that's why there's not a playbook. Well, I think we're going to end on this note is like, why have this podcast, why listen, why be part of the community is there isn't a playbook. There isn't the book you can buy on Amazon that Avanish is going to say, go buy that right now. That's what you need to read and you'll get partnerships. I think not yet. I think there will be one that's more interesting. And I think the point is, maybe that's for a good reason that everyone else's role models, like there's stuff to learn from them, but the goal of business development and being closer to the market and what's happening is to be innovative. And to be a core part, elevate yourself to that conversation at the C-suite that's required of, big public companies. And if you're earlier stage, try to pull that innovation forward. Because I think to the victor goes the spoils on who figures out that game. That's why, you're also part of their HubSpot. It's a core part of HubSpot strategy. We need to make sure that that's a board level conversation.
Absolutely. Could not agree with you more. And I think that's very well summarized. And also one thing I'll just add is I don't think it's a one size fits all either, right? So that's why the why is so important, is really understanding from each organization's perspective, why should they or, and they should not in some cases take on sort of strategy. It requires really thinking that through.
Amazing. Avanish, thank you so much for coming on PartnerUp. And reminders to the audience, if you listen online, you can check out YouTube. If you're on the podcast, rate on Apple Podcasts, subscribe on Spotify, tell Alexa to play PartnerUp. She'll do it. I actually got that set up. And we'll see y'all next time. As a reminder too, in 2 more episodes, the show format is completely relaunching, so you're in for a surprise. We'll see you next time. Peace out.